Elliot Morris, a fierce multimillionaire, believed money could buy anything. He demolished a poor, older man's house to build a shopping mall. Later, when he visited the demolition ruins and saw the place with his own eyes, he found a childhood photo of himself amongst the rubble, and his heart almost stopped. On that fateful July day in 2021, real estate magnate Elliot Morris had his headquarters in Tampa Bay, Florida, an American state. Elliot was well known amongst his co-workers for being a man who would do anything to get what he wanted. He was known for passing on his wisdom to his young employees during meetings, saying in a loud and clear voice that the secret to his success was always prioritizing his goals over his competitors' dreams. While some cry, others have a full bank account, he said with a laugh, to the entertainment of the most fawning employees. Elliot started nurturing this ambition when he was still very young. As soon as he graduated in economics from the famous and well-regarded Harvard University, he began his career in the financial markets. He made much money during the real estate scandal and the 2008 stock market crash. Since then, Elliot has been buying homes and other property from people on the verge of bankruptcy, constantly haggling over every penny, and getting deals on land well below the actual value. He could do this since the sellers were often on the verge of bankruptcy and had no other source of salvation. Thus, his empire and his desire for money grew. As soon as Elliot moved to Florida, he began to think about his most ambitious project, building a high-end shopping center. On the computer, the entire project was finished, but he needed to find the perfect location before beginning the initial construction phase. During his search, he came across 2 large pieces of land that seemed ideal for the project. But there was a catch. An older man named Joe Brook had built a simple house precisely between the 2 tracts of land. Joe was a simple pensioner with numerous mortgages to pay, mortgages owned by the fund of which Elliot was the president. The young millionaire's eyes lit up at the chance, and Elliot became utterly obsessed with where old Joe's properties were located, not only because that was an excellent place to build his business, but especially because Elliot had grown up in that same neighborhood, and the memories of her difficult childhood were still vivid. "One day, I'll be rich and own it all, Mama, and I'll honor our family name." Elliot reminded himself of that promise daily, reinforcing his decision to build his new mall there. So, Elliot decided to use his right to buy the poor man's house and tear it down to clear the land. Elliot was able to pull this move off because his company acted as if it could really help people who were in debt and had many late loans. They repurchased these people's debts, who had innocently put their homes up as collateral. The interest rates were extremely high, and most people could not honor their commitments. Elliot used the clause that let him give his victims a symbolic amount of money as compensation. He then bought their home for much less than they were really worth. When elderly Joe tried to object and went to the public defender, he said that he couldn't do anything because Elliot was acting within the law and, thanks to the mortgage agreement, within his rights. Elliot saw him as nothing more than a thorn in his side that was easy to remove. Please, I don't have anyone, and this house is the only precious reminder of my late wife I have," Joe begged Elliot, who was already there with his men and a bevy of lawyers. "You evict me. How long do you think I'll be able to survive on the nonsense you are paying for my house? At my age, I will end up homeless sooner or later." Elliot could still hear the elderly Joe say that the land was a wedding gift given by his father-in-law so that he and his late wife could build their first home. Joe's father-in-law was a former mayor of the city who got the couple all the subsidies and funding available at the time. Even so, over the years, the couple's bills kept piling up over the years until the worst happened. Joe's wife fell ill, and they had to mortgage the land to be able to pay for the treatment and buy the necessary medicine. But Elliot didn't even listen to the poor man's pleas. "Look here, old man. The new mayor and I are on the same page. All he wants is for this mall to be completed before the next election. He's on my side. So I'm going to tear down this thing you call home in 2 weeks. All you have is 14 days to get your shit together and leave with the money I'm going to pay you as compensation. Is that clear?" Against the businessman, the older man was stunned into silence. He refused to accept even a penny in exchange for his house, but he could not refute the powerful man with any words or arguments. Elliot Morris was a pragmatic and ruthless businessman. He turned around one final time before leaving the old man. "I'll be back here in 2 weeks, but this time with bulldozers. You better believe I'm a man of my word." Joe could hear the millionaire outside speaking firmly. Old Joe's despair grew as the days passed. He didn't know where else to turn. His wife and father-in-law, the former mayor, had both passed away, As a last resort, Joe sat down at an old desk and began writing a letter in an attempt to warm the cold millionaire's heart. Dear Mr. Elliot Morris, I would like to explain why I am unable to accept your payment. The memories of the great love of my life are embedded in every wall and brick of the home I built myself. Everything you want to knock down to make way for a shopping center has a meaning in my simple story. My wife and I had dreamed of our children playing in the garden until we learned I lacked that genetic ability. Over the years, you've built your empire. I've built a house filled with memories. My wife Claire asked that her ashes be scattered over this plot because it was where she had the happiest memories of her life. I vowed to her that I would keep this house until the day I died, at which point it would be given to an orphanage so it could be a home for children who could play in the backyard. Please rethink your project and let us make this dream come true. Signed, Joe Brooke. Joe walked around the neighborhood looking for help after the letter was delivered. He went door to door in an attempt to gather signatures for a petition. People did not understand what he wanted at first, and when they realized that the older man was attempting to prevent the mall's construction on the site, they mocked him and laughed. At that point, he realized his neighbors were looking forward to the mall's opening. After all, the opulent project would increase the entire region's real estate value. The 2 weeks passed like a nightmare for the poor older man, and he began taking tranquilizers to sleep. He hoped that his letter would have some effect, or that something miraculous would happen to change the rich man's mind. As a result, he never packed his belongings or made any changes. But before he knew it, demolition day had arrived. Joe didn't even get to drink his coffee that day. Instead, he woke up early and stared out the window as if a war was about to erupt outside his front door. Elliot's team gradually began to arrive. Excavators, tractors, and a dozen uniformed men waited for the order to demolish everything around them. Please, I beg of you, please don't destroy my house. Old Joe begged Elliot and his men to stop, but they kept pounding on the door and showing off the heavy equipment they had used to knock down the first few walls of the small house. Didn't I tell you to pack your things? Elliot snapped. It's not my problem anymore. Here, take this check and go. I don't have time to listen to or read your silly old stories. Elliot returned to his luxury car and grabbed his phone. Soon, a bailiff showed up with a copy of the warrant proving that the business owner had the right to buy the property and use demolition equipment. But first, he instructed one of his men to remove old Joe from the area. Then he attempted to give the older man the check for the house, but he still refused to accept it. Before he left, old Joe looked at Elliot with tears in his eyes and said, "Young man, you've changed a lot. Money has made you blind and destroyed your soul, but you can't buy everything with money." "What are you talking about? Get that old man out of here," Elliot ordered. Elliot brushed off Joe's words as if they meant nothing, and then he walked a little further to watch the house being torn down. Joe refused to get into Elliot's employee's car. Instead, he walked up the street and saw the first sledgehammer starting to destroy the house where he had lived the best years of his life. By this time, the older man could no longer hold back his tears. As the bricks, wood, and tiles fell to the ground, the feeling of another success filled the millionaire's heart. When he saw every piece of that house come loose and fall to the ground, he knew he was taking new steps to reach his goal and keep his promise to his mother when he was young. Soon, he would feel like he practically owned the entire area. "I'll be back in a bit. Keep working, and don't touch anything until I get there," he said, passing the dusty house that would soon become mere ruins. Hours later, he returned to the demolished site and stared at the rubble. Why so much drama for that kind of junk? The businessman shouted as he crossed the shattered bricks. Elliot tripped over a piece of furniture as he was getting ready to leave and noticed that his shoe was torn. He discovered glass fragments from a picture frame. When he knelt, he saw a picture that caused him to gasp, leaving him in shock. "Mom? That's not possible. What is this doing here?" he said, brushing some more dust off the old photograph in the broken frame. Elliot went to his car and he confirmed that it was indeed a picture of his mother with a baby in her lap. "It's me," he exclaimed again. But what was our photo doing in this old man's house? He called his lawyer and heard the name of the roadside hotel where Joe had stayed. Elliot floored his expensive car and drove as fast as he could to confront the older man again. Joe was in his hotel room, still reeling from what had happened over the past few weeks. Suddenly, he heard a violent knock on his bedroom door and went to see what was happening. Upon opening the door, the older man was once again faced with the man who had turned his life into an actual hell. "You? Why did you come here? Still not happy?" the old man cried when he saw the young investor. "What else have you come to destroy?" Elliot took Joe's hand and held up the photo he had found in the destroyed ruins, but Joe refused to look at him. The businessman was agitated and furious. "How did you get my mom's picture?" he demanded. "It's me and her here. Do you know my mother? What is your relationship with her?" Elliot knew that his mother was a single parent, so when he found a picture of her in Joe's house, he had a lot of questions. "How do you know my mother?" Joe didn't say anything for a few seconds, a silence that made Elliot feel sick. Then, finally speaking, the older man revealed something Elliot could never have anticipated. 30 years ago, Claire, Joe's wife, went shopping one day and saw a young woman crying, sitting alone on a park bench. She was desolate, and Claire approached her, asking if the young woman needed any help. After some time, the sad woman finally revealed that her boyfriend had just abandoned her, and the reason was a blessing in the young woman's life, a newborn she was carrying in her womb. Unfortunately, the boyfriend was not interested in being a father and threw the young woman out of the house. When Elliot heard that, tears slowly started to fill his eyes. "So what happened?" he asked curiously. Old Joe's eyes grew distant as he remembered his beloved Claire coming home with a pregnant young woman. They gave her warm clothes, served her coffee, and made their simple house a shelter for the young woman. Joe told Elliot that his mother's boyfriend, his father, had left her for another woman as soon as he found out she was pregnant. Joe further explained that Elliot's mother lived in the couple's house for over 5 years, as if she were the daughter they never had. "But if she lived with you, why did she move?" "We had a bigger house," Elliot inquired, still skeptical of old Joe's revelation. Joe shook his head and explained that he and his wife decided to use some of their savings to help the young woman attend college because her son's future was a constant concern for her. She wanted to be able to provide for her son and set a good example, so she decided to study business administration. However, Claire insisted on looking after her baby while the young woman studied. "Your mother became a successful businesswoman, but she never forgot Claire or this old man. She always wrote letters and attended my wife's cremation. I was so sad when she died in that accident, young man," Joe explained. "I was there for her funeral, but who would notice that poor old man? You became a rich and successful man, just as she had always wanted, and I was happy about it, but I never thought you would turn out like this." The businessman's eyes were already welling up with tears at this point in the conversation, and his heart was as broken as the home he had just ordered demolished. His mind immediately started to fill with memories, and then he recalled his mother had once mentioned a kind couple as the reason for all of his success. Elliot was completely unaware that she was talking about old Joe and his deceased wife the entire time. Elliot knelt before Joe and begged for forgiveness, wholly overcome with guilt. The businessman believed what he had just heard was not an accident, and Joe's words had served as a painful reminder of the morals his mother had instilled in him, but which, due to his greed, had been buried in his stone heart. When old Joe picked him up off the ground and hugged him, he sobbed. "I swear to God, I'm going to fix this mistake of mine," Elliot said in tears. The following day, he returned to the property and asked old Joe to use his carpentry skills to construct a sign that read, "Under construction." Together, they planted the sign on Joe's property, and the next day, Elliot ordered his men to begin construction of a new home where the rubble lay. Joe went to his car where his suitcase was and retrieved an old, crumpled piece of paper. The older man revealed a hand-drawn picture to Elliot, who was curious to know what it was. "This was my wife's dream home. Even though it's poorly designed, I know it is larger and has more rooms than the demolished house, but the plan is for this house to be repurposed as an orphanage on the day I die. You will have your house and your wife will have an orphanage." Construction began that same day. The workers worked non-stop and were more motivated than ever when they learned the whole story. In 4 months, a new house was built on the same plot of land. The built-up area was 3 times larger than the previous house, and the garden had been completely renovated. Without asking Joe, Elliot had ordered a huge framed picture of Claire to be hung in the house's main hall, a tribute to the woman who had saved his mother's life. Elliot gave Joe this new house and asked him to forgive him for being so proud and ignoring his past and his mother's values. So, Joe forgave the young investor. He was happy that all that had happened had made the young millionaire open his eyes and look inside himself. If you want to know your mother's past stories, you are always welcome to visit this old man as my grandson. Not as a rich, guilt-ridden man, said Joe. That made a big impression on Elliot, who had never been loved by a man before. All he had ever known were business rivals. Joe returned to his new home with a renewed heart and lived a modest life there. He inspired Elliot and taught him that money is necessary, but that only a cynical man knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Inspired by his new grandfather Joe and grandmother Claire, Elliot built other orphanages in different cities. After all, he might have grown up in one himself if Claire and Joe hadn't given the pregnant woman they met 30 years earlier a chance. Elliot continued to be a highly successful businessman, but he began to use much of his profits to help people who were not as lucky as his mother. If you liked the story, please leave a thumbs up, and this other video on the screen will now probably move you as well. Good session, and I'll see you in the next video.